Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a voting session and discussion for the Subcommittee on Transportation and Environment of the Committee on Appropriations. I am Delegate Mark Corman. We have three bills on the agenda today. The first bill is HB 114, the Transit Safety and Investment Act, sponsored by Delegate Leerman. We have amendments from Delegate Leerman. But for simplicity, I'm going to talk through the reprint because I believe everyone received the reprint a day or two ago. And that's usually easier than sort of looking at the amendments in isolation. Just as a reminder, this is a bill we passed last year through the subcommittee, the committee, and the House. It was bipartisan in the committee and in the House, but our bipartisanship has now moved to the Senate. So I don't know if it'll be that way again. But this legislation addresses the capital needs inventory that MTA created at legislative instruction that found about a $2 billion backlog in state of good repair and enhancement funding for MTA. And when I say enhancement funding, this is the eat your vegetables bill. This is not the build a new rail line bill. This is things like making sure the walkways to existing MARC stations are good, not create a new MARC train line to Western Maryland or a new light rail line to Southern Maryland, although those may be valid exercises. That's not what this bill does. So as amended, if you look at page 2 of the bill, I guess it's, sorry, page 3 of the bill, we add in here a program that we have funded before, which is on small business impact grants related to the Purple Line. We fenced off funding for this in the past as a committee because the governor has chosen not to release that funding. We mandate for 2 years funding for that program to help the small business owners impacted by the Purple Line. I would just state, as someone whose district includes the Purple Line, that's become more important given the delays on the Purple Line because it's a longer period of time that these businesses are having this incredible difficulty. And these are really businesses where the entering and exiting of the business has been impacted. Their parking lot has been taken. Yes, parking lot, I said, Delegate Kittleman. I do drive sometimes. And so this is, I think, a really important addition to this bill and obviously very related to the issues of MTA. And then, more significantly, if you look at page 4 and 5, I believe it is, we get into requiring that they report on the state of good repair. One of the challenges we have is when you look at the CTP, the Consolidated Transportation Program, you can sort of do a back of the envelope calculation of what MTA is doing for state of good repair, but it's not clearly stated. And so this will just require them to sort of more clearly state what part of their budget is going to state of good repair. And that'll be on a go forward basis, even after the mandates in this bill expire, we would still require them to do that because obviously maintaining existing systems is pretty important in anything, but obviously, the focus here is on the transit systems. And then, I think the issue people care most about on it's page 6 of the PDF, page 4 of the bill are the numbers. So we did a few things. The first thing we did is for FY23 and 24, you'll notice in the reprint that the numbers increase. That is to match what is in the governor and Department of Transportation's CTP. They have increased their commitment, thankfully, and we appreciate that, to MTA state of good repair for the next couple of fiscal years. And so the bill that we passed last year was actually less than what they put in. And so this matches what they put in. And then for FY25, 26, 27, and 28, we pegged on an additional fiscal year, FY29, which allows us to reduce those numbers a little bit each year to make it a little bit more manageable for MTA. Now, obviously, this isn't desirable because it extends the length of time until the backlog is dealt with, but it does try to address, although I'm sure not to their satisfaction, the issue about flexibility that the agency has raised and concerns about mandates. Now, let me just add in addition on the point about mandates, because this has been an issue with this agency lately. If they, next year have a compelling reason that they do not want to spend the amount of money that this legislation requires on state of good repair, then they are free to come in with a BRFA item to try and address that and ask us to change our mind based on the facts at that time. This is different than, for those of you who have been working with me on this stuff for a while, dedicated funding for Metro, where we can't really adjust that on a year-to-year basis because they're using it for bonding. MTA won't be using this money for bonding. So if an adjustment needs to be made in a future year, they are able to request that adjustment. But what this bill does is, I think, really ensures that they are dealing with the state of good repair and enhancement backlog in a meaningful way and can plan accordingly to address it over the next few years. So with that long monologue over, I know there are questions. I'll start with Delegate Kittleman.
Thank you. You will be delighted to know that I spent about a half an hour Zooming with Administrator Quinn and came away very impressed with what he is doing and planning on doing. I was talking lunch about getting new buses, new rail cars, or rail car rebuilding. And may I presume that this money is geared toward that sort of capital expenditure?
Yes, if you look at the CNI document, which Ken can send around, but it's been circulated before. I'm sure Delegate Leerman has hand-delivered it to your house at some point along the way. There's basically a list of projects. So this is not a black hole of money. I mean, there's a list of projects that they are proceeding through, and they've actually been making some progress. We actually got a budget follow-up yesterday or the day before to someone's inquiry at one of our subcommittee briefings, where the state of good repair backlog is actually a little less now than 2 years ago when that report came out. The enhancement backlog is a little more. Frankly, that's partly due to their expectation that bus costs are going to be a little higher because of the governor's commitment to zero emission vehicles. The governor has a 50% zero emission bus goal by 2030. Regardless of anything the legislature does, that's a gubernatorial goal. So
one of the more important things that they've done are the systems, the technology that they've included and have needed, it seems to me, forever. And the administrator convinced me, and I'm not easy to convince, but he did, that the systems are good and that they will help. And as I've said before, I'm delighted to see money spent on this particular to repair and bring the thing, rather than just spend it to buy new stuff before we finish. So I actually probably will support this bill.
Other questions?
Yes.
Delegate Beitzel, of course.
Just maybe for clarification purposes, the bill does indicate that this establishes a mandated appropriation from fiscal 23 through 28, and you'd indicated that's stretched out to 29. You had indicated they'd come back with a BRFA. Well, this kind of reverses the role of the administration in preparing a budget. You know, in dealing with budgets, if obviously we can't add to the thing, and this probably is an effort to make sure that they got these things in the budget because it's mandated. So it's much harder for the administration to cut something from this going forward if they get into a situation where they're in a budget crunch or something, because they're mandated to do this. I think there's kind of what this bill does is a reversal role between the General Assembly and the administration in how they budget for these things. You have any comment on that?
We do many budgetary mandates. I know some folks don't like them, but they are a very well understood tool of the legislature. Certainly, Secretary Brinkley is very familiar with the budgetary mandates. We do them in all aspects of the budget. This is an area where I believe a majority of the legislature, I don't mean it as a unanimous view of the legislature, but a majority of the legislature views this as an important priority, and we want to make sure that MDOT is making it an important priority. And frankly, by doing a multi-year mandate this way, we allow them to plan accordingly, which is to say that when they are putting together the next CTP and they're looking at FY27, FY28, and FY29, they should be building in there these minimum amounts for the state of good repair funding. And so that's the expectation this bill sets. As I said, if there's a radical change of some kind, for example, if there's another massive hit to the Transportation Trust Fund as a result of COVID-20 or COVID-21, then they can come back and make an adjustment. But the expectation is, yes, that they meet the legislative mandates.
But, you know, if they come back with the BRFA, that has to be approved by the General Assembly, and they may or may not be able to make that adjustment based on the General Assembly, and we've been doing more things to control how the governor manages the budget and that sort of thing. So
yeah, well, can I say this, Delegate Beitzel? Let me say this. This problem with the MTA's backlog and state of good repair was not created by this governor or this administrator or this secretary. This is a longer term problem. So yeah, I frankly wish that someone in the first O'Malley term had started getting a hold of the state of good repair situation at MTA. It's a heck of a lot easier to fix something that's just a little broken than something that needs to be completely refurbished. But I think this is critical that we get in front of this problem. And just before anybody catches it, I'm not suggesting anything about former Secretary Flanagan's leadership of MTA, Deputy Secretary Kittleman. I'm just making the point that this problem was not created overnight and was not created by a single administrator, secretary, or governor.
Just have you, as the administration has commented on this, are they opposing this change or this bill, or what's their position on this?
My understanding is they still oppose the bill.
Yeah, okay.
I've not heard anything different from them. I've communicated to them multiple times. And when I say the administration, I mean the Maryland Department of Transportation as a whole unit. I'm sure there are individuals within that who might have their own opinions, but the formal position of the department has been opposition.
The one reason, I mean, I always vote against mandates, but in this case, apparently the governor has put the first 2 years, he's already put into the budget. And with transportation, I think it's nice if you can plan. So I'm making an exception from my rule.
Yeah. Well, that's nice. Because the governor will be going in 2 years, or somebody else can deal with it.
We don't have to say who on this call. Any other questions, Delegate Beitzel?
No, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Vice Chair Krim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's just a couple points I would like to raise here, and that's with the purple line issues. Delegate Beitzel and I have been on the committee the longest, I think, and he'll remember that Delegate Aruna Miller used to bring up that issue every year about the businesses that will suffer as a result of construction where the purple line is. So this really isn't anything new. I think they've been aware of it for a very long time. And the second thing is I'll talk about the state of good repair. And I think I've talked about this before, that with our highways, we have system preservation. And that is probably the first thing that's funded every year. And when we had all of these reductions in the CTP as a result of declining revenue, system preservation continued to be fully funded. So I equate state of good repair with system preservation. So when you speak of those two things, I think you should equate them as, we have to maintain, and this is what Delegate Kittleman says. I mean, we're doing that for the highways. There's no reason why we shouldn't be doing the same thing for transit. And that's my.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I see Delegate Beitzel has another question, but anybody need a first bite at the apple before Delegate Beitzel? Okay, Delegate Beitzel.
Yeah, I just have to respond to that, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, when you direct more money from one into one program, some other program is going to feel the consequences. And just a little bit of rebuttal to Vice Chair Krim. We go back to when the highway user funds were taken from local jurisdictions, and I represent the rural areas of the state where they'd lost 90% of their funding at expense of other programs. And the more things that keep going in these directions, there was always hope that we could restore those highway user funds back to where they were for like 60 years. And when it's every system needs preserved, obviously, but the local jurisdictions now they have to maintain their roads. And I see in the rural areas of the state, we're suffering because the counties, and especially, when you do get in economic downturns, in my county, they had a maintenance program, and we had so many miles, and every year we did so much. And when I was county commissioner, we had to set up that whole program, and now they don't have the funds to do that. They aren't paving, roads are falling apart. So we have to maintain our local roads where they run school buses, the mailboxes, people get out from their homes to go get their groceries and everything else. So, and many more people use their automobiles, and especially in areas where there is no transportation. So I just had to counter that argument a little bit. So thank you for that.
Delegate Beitzel, I was an alderman in the city of Frederick when highway user revenue was cut. And so I'm well aware of what's going on in the local jurisdictions and how we had to cope with that and how we had to adjust our repairs in the city and what our transportation program was. And we did it. So I think a lot of these jurisdictions are doing what they need to do, but I agree, probably should work on that and get them their highway user back.
Thank you, Delegate Beitzel, Vice Chair Krim, Delegate Metzger.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in Eastern Baltimore County, so we don't have the purple lines and the mass transit. We talk about mass transit, but we really have very limited. But I'm excited to hear that they're going to update. But what I'm concerned about, have they installed any more? I haven't heard any word about the monorail. They talked about the monorail. Have they mentioned any more about that whatsoever? Is this part of that package as well?
No. So the monorail would run, the proposed monorail is from basically my part of Montgomery County, lower Montgomery County, up to Delegate Krim's area in Frederick. It was proposed as either an alternative or a complement to the I-270 roadway expansion that's being done. And the Maryland Department of Transportation, not MTA, they actually weren't involved, had agreed to do a feasibility study at the comptroller's request. That study's come out. I think it was emailed to your inbox, but this money is for state of good repair and enhancement, which is not new lines. So MTA has not been involved in the monorail, and this money could not be used to expand the footprint of the system.
Well,
even if they were.
I like the enhancement because my area does need some modern buses and that kind of thing. So I'm probably going to support this. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Delegate Metzger. I'd like to move the amendments.
Second.
Discussion on the amendments.
I beg your pardon?
I asked if there's any discussion on the amendments. I guess not. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Does anyone want to be recorded opposed on the amendments? Okay, so the amendments are unanimous. I'd move the bill.
Second.
Any discussion on the bill?
Move the bill.
All right, thank you. Move it again. All right, so the bill's moved. It's been seconded. No further discussion, although I think we had a pretty robust discussion walking through the reprint, which I appreciate. Why don't we go ahead? I think I know what it's going to look like, but let me just say, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anyone want to be recorded in opposition? Okay, I guess I didn't know what it was going to look like. All right. So the bill has passed. The next bill on our agenda is the governor's version of MES reform. It is HB 741. As you all are aware, we adopted 98% of what was in the governor's bill into the bill that I sponsored. And so in order to clean out the drawer, we've been asked to move this unfavorable to allow us to clean out the drawer. And I did communicate that to Aaron Chase in the governor's office this morning when providing a general update on the area reform. So I'd move unfavorable.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The last bill we have today is HB 1099. This is the Historic African American Cemeteries Preservation Fund and Study. This was the bill brought to us by Delegate Carr. I'm sure many of you remember we had a quite robust full committee hearing that the vice chair presided over. Was that about 2 weeks ago, Mr. Vice Chair?
Yes.
With lots of favorable amendment testimony and other discussion. And so I thought it might be good today to just have a general discussion on the bill because there's some amendments floating out there, and I think it needs a little bit more work. But before I open up to the members, Ken, is that a fair statement of the overall state of play? Anything you want to add?
What was that number again?
HB 1099.
Yeah, HB 1099. So there also, I did send a copy of the fiscal note for your reference in the last hour. And overall, Chair Corman, you're correct. There are a number of community organizations who are definitely in favor of this bill. But some of the issues mainly included ensuring that different community organizations would essentially have a seat at the table in terms of this bill.
So the bill, as I understand it, and Ken, correct me if I'm missing anything, it basically has two parts. One is it sets up a fund and sort of a grant program from that fund, but there's no source for the funding. Now, we do that at times. We create funds that don't have funding sources, but in this case, there's no funding source. There's also no mandate to provide funding. So Delegate Kittleman, you can lower your antenna. There's no mandate in this bill currently. The second part of it is a study, which is sort of the uncodified back of the bill. I think it's section 2 language that the Department of Planning would have to undertake. So I don't know if any members have thoughts on the legislation as it currently stands or potential amendments. I did ask Delegate Lewis if he could talk to the sponsor about this. I don't know if he wants to add anything here.
Yeah, I'll add that I did briefly speak with Delegate Al Carr, who sponsored the bill. And, there was concerns, like Ken said, from folks in the community, particularly about, they're concerned about an African-American cemetery actually in our chairman's district. And what do we do with the remains of the folks who live there? How do we preserve it? How do we allow for the voices of those descendants to have a say in the process? Okay. I think what some of the advocates were looking for were essentially them being the only folks who can say what happens, as opposed to finding the appropriate process. I think we can all agree that this is important, but it could be, difficult identifying who are descendants, even, particularly among African Americans. You go back far enough, there aren't adequate records. So is it, is a descendant the people who live in the immediate communities, or is it the blood relatives of the folks? How do you prove that? And et cetera, et cetera. I think we kick it over to the study, to figure out what's the appropriate way for inclusion in the program writ large without dictating specifically how that can be done. And the sponsor was good with that, and it's my understanding that the community is supportive of that.
Yeah, I would just say, I'm not sure we can speak for the community. I did have a meeting with some of the advocates yesterday. A lot of the folks who were favorable with the amendment were from my district, actually. And I wouldn't want to speak for them, but I think certainly the concerns you articulated, Delegate Lewis, are definitely the ones they were articulating at the hearing.
So we're not going to do the study that's in the bill. We're doing a study to figure out who should be part of the study. Is that what we're doing?
I'll kick it over to Ken. We're kicking over some ideas.
Yeah, if I could just interject. So the bill does provide for a lot of, I would say, organized activity to determine what's going on with different cemeteries in the state, perhaps cataloging things. And then the second piece of the bill does deal with the actual fund. And as the chair stated, there's no mandate for that fund. So one way that what the delegate said could be accomplished is continue the study as is in the bill, because it's going to address the concerns the community has. However, in terms of beefing up community involvement, that could be something that could be added in to the study by perhaps looking at ways to incorporate other organizations in. And of course, as a committee, you also have options to have amendments that would bring different organizations into perhaps working with the commission on the study itself, and have them maybe not as co-authors of the study, but definitely have them as close stakeholders involved in how this study can work. So there are different ways it can be accomplished, but I would say all of this could kind of be thrown in the pot of moving everything towards getting everything together in one study. That could all be accomplished essentially in one study.
Okay. I mean, the way I understood the testimony is that people were pretty passionate about being at the table. So, and if that's not part of this bill, then I think maybe our chairman could be in a little bit of trouble. So we don't want to do that. So I totally support doing the like the inventory of all the African-American cemeteries around the state. I think that's very important. But the second part about who's at the table is the concern I have. So what you're saying, Ken, is that we can put another amendment on there that will incorporate figuring out who's at the table. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You could definitely have a directed. There are a lot of important organizations already involved in this bill, and you could certainly have the commission that is more or less in charge of this study. You could certainly give them a directive to involve various organizations. There are a lot of ways you could do that for sure.
So are you good with that, Mr. Chairman? This is your district, so.
Well, it's not only my district. I mean, I appreciate that some of the advocates are from my district, but I think a key thing to remember about this bill is it is a statewide bill. But thank you, Vice Chair. I appreciate the cover. Delegate Beitzel?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I made a note on the note thing, as I do when I hear bills, and I got written down there that I'm opposed to the bill. I think partially in part because of the nature of the testimony and the way it was presented. But looking at the bill, the Maryland Department of Planning has a lot of resources. You have the historic preservation, and all that funding. It seems like this is something that they could accomplish in-house without money. So if the bill doesn't have any mandated funding, you would mandate those reports, and if they needed funding for any particular thing, couldn't they come back to us? So since it's currently there's no fiscal note on it, I don't want to be opposed to something that's meaningful and has really historic significance. So since it doesn't have any funding, the question is, does the Maryland Department of Environment have the resources with everything that they have and to do this anyway?
So let me just say I think there is a little bit of a fiscal note for the cost of the study, Delegate Beitzel. So there's no grants provided for in this bill. There's no funding for grants, but there is a cost, as there often is when we have a fiscal note. Without a mandate, there can still be a sort of an overhead cost. And I think based on having spoken to the Secretary of Planning, a big chunk of that is, he thinks they need to hire a consultant to do this right. And to guide them along. And let me also just add that I think one of the concerns that some of the stakeholders have is having input into who that consultant is, even to start, to make sure that the consultant is somebody who is going to be open to their concerns. So, but yeah, no, I think your point about in the future, if they need money coming back to us, I think that's right. I think that's part of why the direction, I think, based on discussions with Delegate Lewis, who's spoken to Delegate Carr and others, I think the idea of sort of removing the fund piece of this for now is certainly as a first step where we're probably going to go. Then the question is, do we include anything else in the study beyond what's currently written in the bill to try to position us better for the future, whether it's they come back for another bill on a fund or, the governor decides to fund projects, whatever it is, however you do it. I'll also add that, I did speak to the Secretary about whether some of their existing funds could be used for some of this type of work past the study stage, the actual what you're doing at the cemeteries. And the problem they have is that a lot of the funding that they're allowed to sort of distribute is capital and has to meet our GO bond capital requirements. But many of the costs at these cemeteries would really be considered operating costs. So they can't use some of their existing great sources of funds for this. But again, that's on the other side of a study and how you would sort of put out grants to do some of the work that the study would sort of confirm. We already know we need it, but would sort of confirm we need it and how it would be done and so on.
But a lot of those advocates were indicated that they weren't supportive of the bill unless it was amended to change the way the stakeholders and other people were involved in having say over this. And I don't think that we've done that with any other bills, to let outside organizations or people dictate how and if we're going to prepare legislation and fund it. So that was a little disturbing to me. So what does the amendment, is there any amendments on this, and does the amendment provide some of those things that those people were testifying on the bill asked for? Does that
So that's what we're talking about right now, Delegate Bites. So we don't have an amendment yet. We wanted to bring this to the subcommittee for some discussion, because obviously it's a issue that brought a lot of passion to the committee. And so we just wanted to start with a general discussion. Though again, Delegate Lewis has been kind enough to work with Ken and the sponsor about discussing potential amendments, but we're not voting on anything today. This is just a discussion.
Okay, great.
Delegate Kittleman?
Thank you. I'm just going to sort of echo what Delegate Beitzel just said, but the piece that upset me, well, didn't upset me, but that I thought was over the top, was not just wanting to participate, which I think is perfectly reasonable, but there was a great deal of call for having cemeteries that are identified taken and owned by their group, as opposed to the landowners who currently own whatever land they're on. And I didn't say that exactly right, but those kinds of goals, I think, are things I doubt very seriously whether either side of the aisle would like to see them. I don't know if there's anything that could be put into the amendment that would indicate that, say, you can't do this, which is kind of stupid. And I do think probably that having talked to them, and if people are involved in a study group, they can be brought away from that. But I do set that forth as a concern.
Okay. Thank you, Delegate Kittleman. Delegate Metzger?
Yeah, my only concern is that I feel like, I don't know how to say this properly, but I'll say it the way I was raised. It sounds like a whole lot of chiefs and not enough Indians in the program. But I feel like that there's too many people trying to become the power player. And I don't think when you have that many people at the table, you can get much accomplished. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me offer you a more modern phrase, which is too many cooks in the kitchen. That might be one that's more.
I'll use that one. Too many
years.
cooks in the kitchen. That's very good.
Yeah.
Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law is too many. But yeah, I just feel like this might need to go back to the drawing board and look at it a different way.
Yeah, well, you're on the drawing board right now. This is the drawing board. So we're going to see if we can work out an amendment that meets people's needs. I'll just say, when we do studies, we oftentimes have many cooks in the kitchen on our studies. I appreciate the point that someone has to ultimately be in charge, but we often require consultation with all kinds of groups, all kinds of stakeholders. And so, we can see if we can work that out here. And if we can't, yes, Delegate Metzger, the point you made at the committee a few weeks ago, and the point you made here is, it goes back to the work group, back to the drawing board, whichever it is, and you keep going. But I think based on some of the work of Delegate Lewis and Ken, we might be able to come up with at least a study provision that serves the goals of the sponsor and many of the supporters of this legislation. But if we ultimately can't, that'll be how it is. But we can give it a try. We have time here, especially after we make our budget decisions in a half hour or so.
So ultimately, whatever we need to do to make it work, I'm with. But just right now, I'm not there.
Appreciate that, Delegate.
Sure. The only thing I'll add to this, and I think it's critically important for us to be deliberative and make sure people are included, because if you all did check the info testimony, I think the planning department sent, we have a lot of these communities across the entire state that I imagine folks would want to chime in on. I can think of Sodderly, the Sodderly Plantation, which is referenced there, but I'm close with the folks who lead up their foundation now. I've recently heard of, I guess, students at Frostburg University who found apparently there was a historical African-American community called Brownsville that was built on, Frostburg was built on top of there. That I know there has to be one primary person, but it's okay if we have some other people chime in because there are many communities across all of Maryland that may be affected. And I think it's, being inclusive always helps with the process.
Ken, thank you, Delegate Lewis. Ken, did you want to add something?
Yeah, if I could just add something to the last couple of points, I would just note that several organizations, when they expressed the concern about being at the table, some of those issues concerned having perhaps open meetings and perhaps a way of having some kind of public commentary session, like we have here in the General Assembly, where people can come and at least testify on new moves made by the commission. So I would definitely offer that option. And as I spoke to Delegate Lewis yesterday, also when he was talking about moving and housing everything over in the commission, the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, that organization already knows how to reach out to a lot of different resources and a lot of different stakeholders. So if you do follow up on that suggestion, I would note that in the fiscal note, that organization does say that they could implement their tasks with existing resources. So in terms of the price tag and in terms of the outreach, things are pretty much settled in that way, and we can definitely draft some amendments that will move in that direction.
Thank you, Ken. Delegate Kittleman, I saw your hand up a minute ago. I don't know if you were.
I was taking it down.
Oh, got it. Okay. Any other discussion on this? Obviously, Delegate Lewis and Ken will continue working together to see if they can come up with a set of amendments that meet a lot of people's different views here.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we will probably have another meeting next week at some point at the subcommittee level. Obviously, we'll have the MTA bill on full committee on, it's on Friday, I guess tomorrow for the voting session. And then we all have our decisions meeting in about 23 minutes. So go get that cup of coffee and I'll see you all back on the Zoom real soon. With that, I think we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Ken, thank you.
Thanks.